Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the side event Strengthening Adaptive Solutions in the Regional Response to the Syria Crisis, which is co-organized by the UNDP Sub-Regional Response Facility and the Islamic Development Bank. My name is Amy Rogers. I'm the coordinator of the Durable Solutions platform and very happy to be moderating this event today. I think when we think about solutions, also when it's adaptive solutions and development approaches, the fact that we have to think about people no longer having protection and assistance needs that are related to displacement, and the fact that their rights need to be fulfilled. So basically that they need to be integrated in a place, means that we're talking about everything that a human being in all our sort of non-homogeneous group that we are needs. And that means as well that it's basically impossible to be a specialist in this, which is why it's so important that events like this, but in general, aid actors or anybody in the response are aware that they're not an island and that they need to talk to each other and that they share experiences and transparently talk about challenges. And why I'm so happy to be welcoming here such a diverse panel, because we've got people from the NGO sector, the private sector, donors and the UN who are going to be bringing their regional and country perspectives in the next hour and a half. Before giving the floor to the co-chairs of the event, there's a couple of things that I would like to mention. First of all, the event is going to be recorded so that it can be live streamed as well, or not live streamed, streamed afterwards. There is a chat box available, but it's not the chat box, it's the Q&A box. You will find it at the bottom of the screen. Some participants have already shared some expectations and questions with us beforehand, so we'll be using them in the Q&A section at the end as well. But you can also raise your hand for questions if you're online, and we will have somebody monitoring and able to unmute and mute you. I'm using a phone to aid in smooth moderation, but also because we've got a lot of people that are going to be speaking here today. So I'm going to be quite strict actually on the time as well. I now have the pleasure of introducing the co-chairs of the side event. We have Ms. Sarah Poole, who has been serving as UNDP's Deputy Assistant Administrator and Deputy Regional Director of the Regional Bureau for Arab States since 2018. She has a long and distinguished career in UNDP. Prior to this appointment, she served as UNDP's Deputy Director of the Bureau for Program and Policy Support, and as the Senior Regional Advisor and Division Chief in the Regional Bureau for Europe and CIS. And we have Mr. Abdimajid Abdullahi, who joined the Islamic Development Bank in 2007. As the manager of the Fragility and Resilience Division, he currently oversees fragility, disaster risk management, resilience, and civil society engagement in the member countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America, Middle East, and Europe. So basically all over the world. As the head of the Social Development Cluster, he has led the strategic efforts, policies, and strategies of the bank to address fragility, build resilience, engage civil society, and empower youth and women in member countries. Previously, he led and managed a portfolio of more than $2 billion in the social sectors, which include skills development, expanding the quality of education, entrepreneurship development, strengthening of youth employability in the member countries as well. I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Sarah Poole.
Thank you so much, Amy. Before I begin my remarks, I just want to ensure that you and the participants can hear me. Yes. Wonderful. Amy, thank you very much for the warm welcome. And I would like to join you first, thanking all of the participants who are joining today, whether in the room with you there or online, joining from around the world. And as you said, it's such an important opportunity that we have today to come together to discuss such important and challenging issues as the adaptive solutions, bringing together the different experience and perspectives that exist. And I do think, as you've highlighted, it is quite noteworthy that in the participants and around our virtual and physical room, we have representatives from governments, IFIs, donors, civil society organizations, private sector, the UN family and beyond for joining today's event. So I think the large participation and interest is really a reflection of how critical our discussion today is. Let me also say at the outset that as UNDP, we are very proud to be co-organizing this side event together with the Islamic Development Bank on such a timely topic. It's a timely topic globally, given the increasingly protracted forced displacement situations, and of course, especially in the Syrian refugee crisis. Excuse me. As the Syria crisis enters its 13th year, as we know, the countries of the region continue to host a significant number of forcibly displaced people, with 7.4 million refugees and asylum seekers in Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey, as well as over 6.7 million internally displaced persons in Syria. Altogether, this represents a shocking 15% of the total number of forcibly displaced people globally. We know that countries in the sub-region are dealing with important development challenges on their own, including whether related to socioeconomic factors, the impact of natural disasters, as we saw in the devastating earthquake in February, or responding to the impact of climate change, amongst other challenges. And then, of course, also in addition to addressing the Syrian refugee crisis. Forced displacement is too often perceived as a temporary state for forcibly displaced people until it is safe for them to return. As a result, often the solutions that we see may be short-term by nature, but Amy, as you've highlighted, in reality, the duration and impact of displacement are in fact both long-term and also cover aspects across the perspective of people's lives, and the Syria crisis being a case in point. We must now more than ever invest in sustainable and long-term adaptive solutions which meet the needs of refugees and host communities alike. So it is against this backdrop that UNDP has worked extensively to provide a resilience-based development approach to the Syrian crisis together with our partners, bringing together experience and lessons learned directly relevant to resilience approaches, whether in the area of governance, local development, conflict prevention, climate mitigation and adaptation, gender, inclusive economic growth, innovations, and financing, all very much based on the core principle of leaving no one behind. Relevant to today's discussion, we are focusing also on working together with partners on development pathways that support durable solutions through inclusion of forcibly displaced people, developing innovative programming through partnerships, and formulating financing modalities to support solutions. And today we will have the opportunity throughout the agenda to learn further from adaptive solution approaches that are being tested and applied in countries such as Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan. We will also hear about efforts to advanced adaptive solutions, for example, assessing the cost and benefits of inclusion rather than marginalization, and working even more closely and effectively through national systems such as social protection, and also on forging strategic partnerships, for example, with the private sector and others. Our discussion today is also part of an ongoing development partners in the approach that we must take, therefore bringing on a long-term view towards the governance and the socioeconomic conditions that are necessary for countries to recover from forced displacement crises and resume progress towards the SDGs and the 2030 Agenda. The upcoming Global Refugee Forum, which is taking place later this year, co-convened by Jordan, presents also a further opportunity to elevate the adaptive solutions and inclusion of displaced populations. It is now my pleasure to pass the floor to Mr. Abdullahi, the Fragility and Resilience Manager from the Islamic Development Bank, who is also just introduced, and to thank again ISDB for the partnership that we have together and all of the participants on today's session. And we look forward to a very constructive and informative conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I thank you for these excellent opening remarks. It's really indeed an honor to address this important session on adaptive solutions for the increasing crisis that we face today. We are honored also to co-organize this important session with UNDP, and this is really shows the strong partnership between the two institutions is not only to work together on the ground, but also to share the light on successful practices, lessons learned, and experience in addressing critical challenges that our member countries are facing, including Syria. Global challenges like conflict, climate change, COVID-19 pandemic have led to surge in terms of crisis, resulting over 274 million people that are requiring humanitarian assistance. Forced displacement, as was rightly mentioned by the previous speaker, is a critical challenge. Over more than 100 million people are currently on the move. To give you the load on the pressure on the Islamic Development Bank member country, 8 of the top 12 hosting refugee countries are Islamic Development Bank member countries. This is a huge challenge. 3 of the top 5 producing refugee countries are our member countries. So the burden and pressure on us is quite huge. To tackle this challenge, the Islamic Development Bank Group has been very active to support member countries and the people affected by this crisis to address this challenge through various support in terms of sectors to support most vulnerable groups, including refugees. We have provided an assistance of over $6 billion in terms of supporting refugees, hosting communities, and the most vulnerable groups in the member country and also in the region that hosts a significant number of Syrian refugees. To that, efforts, the bank has adopted a strategy that tackles poverty, building resilience, and promote green growth, investing also inclusive human capital development. The strategy is centered around 2 priority areas. Number 1 is investing in green, resilient, and sustainable infrastructure, and also support comprehensive and inclusive human capital development. The bank will mainstream through this strategy Islamic finance, climate change, women and youth, and capacity development in its programs and projects. Addressing the root causes of forced displacement, such as conflict and inequality, is crucial. This necessitates a systematic approach that tackles the underlying drivers of displacement within the broader political and economic context. To bridge the gap between humanitarian and development efforts, the ISDB has adopted its fragility and resilience policy, aiming to support refugees and hosting communities. The policy allows for more comprehensive understanding of the root causes and dynamics of displacement, enabling stakeholders to develop and implement local adaptive solutions that are responsive to the unique circumstances of each institution. The bank is committed to support education, skills development, and entrepreneurship for young refugees and hosting communities, particularly those countries that are hosting significant number of Syrian refugees, including Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, Turkey, and Egypt. We have been supporting through different programs and projects. More importantly, the bank, in partnership with regional and global development partners, including Abdulaziz Education Trust Fund, SPAC, and other regional actors, we have been supporting to address the challenge that Syrian refugees are facing. We have designed a significant number of programs, notably the ISDB education program for Syrian refugees, which has enabled over 12,000 Syrian refugees to access higher education and digital skills. This most recent skills training and education program STEP, targeting over 15 member countries that host over 1 million refugees and IDPs, is a great example. Our target is to reach around 1 million out-of-school children that are in the refugee camps to access basic education and other essential services. More recently, also ISDB and Islamic Solidarity Fund for Development, which is the IDA type of the World Bank, has and UNHCR have introduced Global Islamic Fund for Refugees, which aims to mobilize resources to support refugees and hosting communities. IDB Group has also approved more recently around 10.4 billion for the Food Security Response Program, which is a proactive effort to support member countries, including those who are hosting significant number of refugees, to address the immediate and long-term challenge of food insecurity. The aim is to address the needs of the present and prepare the long-term sustainability by developing a robust food system beyond the current crisis. And within the program, we have approved around 200 million to support the government of Jordan to respond to the current global food crisis that faces many people in the country, and significant number of refugees will benefit from this program. Furthermore, an adaptive solutions approach encourages innovation, learning, and adaptation to address forced displacement. The bank and Islamic Solidarity Fund and UNDP have introduced an NGO empowerment for poverty reduction program known as Tadamun. Tadamun in Arabic is solidarity. It is designed to support and empower civil society organizations to enhance socio-economic well-being through refugee education, job creation, and community development programs. The bank supports refugees with a scholarship for higher education, enabling them to contribute to their countries and rebuilding efforts. This approach promotes sustainable solutions that empower displaced individuals and communities. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate that the Islamic Development Bank group remains committed to supporting these efforts and working towards sustainable development. And I hope the workshop discussions will greatly enhance the global efforts in finding innovative, adaptive solutions to tackle the challenge of forced displacement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abdi Majid, and thank you, Sarah, both for your introductory remarks and for already laying out a little bit of the challenges that can be faced when implementing programming in this region. To talk a little bit more about how initiatives can advance development pathways to solutions, we have speakers now from UNDP, Spark, the DG Skills Association, and Al Khourer Foundation. Starting with Abdallah Al-Laham, who is the coordinator for the Sub-Regional Response Facility for the Syria crisis, and currently managing the Sub-Regional Response Facility. He brings over 20 years of professional and managerial experience from working in crisis and post-crisis countries. And in his current post, leads the coordination and management of the 3RP, the Regional Refugee and Resilience Plan, together with UNHCR. He focuses on advancing a resilience-based development approach, the HDP nexus, and adaptive solutions through knowledge generation and establishing strategic partnerships. And previously has worked on numerous crisis and post-crisis countries like Somalia, Uganda, Pakistan, and Lebanon, leading in resilience building. Abdallah?
Thank you so much, Amy, and thanks to Sarah and Abdi for setting the scene for all of us. Today, I think we'll hear a couple of examples on how we can demonstrate our ability to make sure that we are advancing a little bit on the solutions in such complex environment, especially when it comes, to displacement in a protracted nature. We don't look at humanitarian only, but we have to look at developmental solutions. And as Abdi and Majid mentioned from ISDB, that we have to be innovative in our approaches and we have to learn so that we can, extrapolate and make sure that, what we are learning, can be applied in other crises as well. This is really critical, as I see it, The position paper that we are going, to present to you today builds a lot on the durable solution concepts. Yet, because the durable solution concept, and the options that are entailing in there, take a long time, to achieve. We have looked at incremental ways of achieving, results. And that's why we are focusing on adaptive solution incrementally and building on those examples. So towards that, what we are trying to do as much as possible, to make sure that what we are doing at this stage in time is impactful and can lead to a longer term durable solution option. What we have done so far, we have discussed and consulted with a lot with so many people from the donor community, from the IFIs, from the technical people and individuals to come up with this particular, adaptive solution position paper that will help us and you as well, to take drastic action to make an impact in such context. Next, please. So towards that, as you can see, we capitalize a lot on linking both humanitarian and development approaches, which we call it now the nexus, to make sure that, all the partners, everybody are working, towards a common goal at the end of the day. And we are trying to make sure that, our work is focused a lot on national and local systems that are able to deliver on the response that is needed in such complex environment. So towards that, we have adopted 4 transitions under this particular, initiative. Next, please. So the first, I can see that there is a delay. Next, please. Yes. So the first shift is focused a lot on the narrative that you are using. No, go back, please. Thank you. So the first transition, looks at the policy dialogue, and this is critical, in our view, and how we can, elevate that to make sure that we are focused a lot on ownership. The second one is focused on innovative programming, and that is, what we are seeing at this stage in time is adaptive solution is part of that approach that we are adopting. And the third one is expanding on partnership, and this is exactly what brings us all, is this the notion of partnership. I'm so happy, to see that we have a foundation, we have MDBs, we have some donors as well, with us, without which, we cannot make an impact. So all of us, our concerted effort will lead to an impactful result at the end of the day. And the last thing is that, we are hoping, to work with governments to come up with innovative financing solutions. I will stop here and show you a short video that also demonstrates how we are advancing on those adaptive solutions before we give our distinguished panelists to present their findings on how they have advanced on adaptive solution in 3 countries. So Murad, can you please start?
14 million people have fled their homes due to conflict in the Middle East. 9 out of 10 of them are Syrians. Many people have been displaced for years. They struggle with legal and policy challenges on top of other hardships. Hosting displaced people stretches existing services and infrastructure. Greater resources are needed for governments, economies, and societies. COVID-19, high energy prices, and climate change make life more difficult. Shortfalls in aid financing and weak governance add to the challenges. While humanitarian aid saves lives, supporting development breaks the cycle of conflict and displacement. In the countries affected by the Syria crisis, UNDP works to reduce inequalities and build resilience. We enhance national and local capacity to prevent and respond to displacement. We strengthen collaboration with humanitarian development and peace partners, the private sector, and academia. Through innovative, locally designed programs and long-term financing, we support people in reclaiming their agency. Even in times of crisis, development solutions cannot wait.
Thank you very much.
With that, I turn to Amy. Yes, Amy. Sorry.
Thank you. No, I was going to say thank you for so concisely outlining the framework that we're discussing and staying also within the allotted speaking time. And I think the video really does help illustrate the problem that we're discussing. The next three speakers are briefly going to present pilot adaptive solutions initiatives across 3 countries that were affected by the Syria crisis. We're going to start with Elina Silen, who is the Chief Technical Advisor for the Crisis Response Portfolio at UNDP in Lebanon. She's going to outline how UNDP Lebanon advances adaptive solutions to address protracted displacement, despite the challenges in the economic, financial, and political crises that are currently taking place in Lebanon. Lebanon has become a best practice country through the integrated approach of coordination, leadership, tensions and conflict analysis, and subnational programming in response to the impact of the Syria crisis. And Elina has a wealth of experience in coordination, strategic planning, and data management across the humanitarian development and peace nexus, and has worked in many crises and post-crisis contexts like Afghanistan, Syria, Sudan, and Nigeria. Elina, the question that we would like to pose to you is, in a challenging socioeconomic and political context like Lebanon, can you tell us about how you are advancing adaptive solutions?
Thank you, Amy, and greetings, colleagues. I'm really happy to be with you here today to share a little bit about Lebanon's experience in terms of adaptive solutions. So today I'll be mainly talking about 2 tools. But before I do that, I just wanted to give a little bit of a background on where we are in terms of capturing and working with adaptive solutions here in Lebanon. So last year, after the regional paper was produced, we actually did a country level deep dive here to really kind of be able to identify some of the valuable practices for learning and replication. As you mentioned, Amy, Lebanon is in many ways considered a best practice country in terms of this, and we thought it would be important to sort of capture this in terms of sharing. Now, obviously, Lebanon, in addition to having a protracted displacement crisis since 2019, we have now an economic, financial, and political crisis on top, which makes it even more challenging to be working within this context when with adaptive solutions. And we don't have a formal government in place. Most of the institutions at all levels have completely or almost collapsed. And at the same time, we have growing humanitarian needs and escalating community tensions, which is really kind of making it difficult to press and push towards this development approach and working with more innovative ways across the nexus. And our approach is really kind of to try to prepare ourselves as much as possible through this adaptive solutions management approach to be ready that by the time we will have a formal government in place and hopefully reforms will be implemented, we will be ready to kind of quickly unlock some of this development assistance. So to do so, 2 of the key tools that we have here in Lebanon is first and foremost the tension monitoring system, which you can see here on the screen. And this is a product that plays a crucial role in advancing adaptive solutions for all partners in Lebanon. Here we work through a very diverse network of partnerships, including with UNHCR and the governments, and we try to collect different elements of data around tensions, communal relations, and then to kind of analyze these trends and different impacts and to share this information with partners so that partners are able to quickly adapt their response on the ground. And we also use some of this data to do advocacy. So for example, currently we're working with donors and partners on shifting to a dual currency approach to cash in Lebanon. And here, of course, this is a big adaptation approach that we really need to do through a conflict sensitive perspective. And here evidence and data needs to be at the forefront, making sure also that population voices are heard in terms of making these important shifts. So this kind of speaks to the innovation approach that Abdallah was talking about, but also the need to work with these more diverse partnerships in terms of moving forward on these adaptive solutions. So this data that we produce is also made available to partners. And for those of you who are online, I'm going to paste the link in the chat where you can also access some of this data and you can see for yourself how working as a partner in Lebanon using this data is there. The second tool that we have are the mechanisms for stability and local development. This is an innovative and locally driven methodology that we're working with in a context where, of course, the durable solutions options that we're working with is mainly return. So here we're trying to address tensions and resource pressures in crisis-affected municipalities. It was born out of a need to plan for local solutions, so local adaptive solutions that are inclusive and participatory, and that empower us to really develop these evidence-based action plans for development approaches within the protracted displacement context. So these are two of the tools within Lebanon, and also the MSLD, I think is really innovative and important in terms of how it really engages with a wide range of partners, so including, of course, the local level municipalities and other community stakeholders. So I think I'll wrap up there, Amy, and hopefully there will be some space for questions later. And hopefully please take a tour of the dashboard link as well.
Thank you, Elina. That was very insightful. We are going to hear from Philippe Clerc next. He's been working in Turkey at UNDP as a resilience advisor for the last 3 years. And he works across the UNDP portfolio, particularly on refugee issues and more recently the earthquake response. He has worked in development, humanitarian and advocacy policy and research areas in Africa, Asia and the Middle East since 1997, with various leading international relief, development and human rights organizations in senior positions. And he's currently completing a doctorate on policy research and practice on resilience evolution in the aid sector. Philippe, we heard about programming tools. Can you expand on the different angles you have taken in Turkey to operationalize adaptive solutions, namely on trade? And in what ways is it adaptive to the socio-economic context and the needs of refugees and host communities?
Thank you, and good afternoon. Let me take you through the Turkey Compact, which is an initiative actually which we consider innovative and adapted policy work as well to respond positively to the large refugee presence in Turkey through trade perspectives. I just want to give you a few words on the background, actually, on the rationale why we embark on this initiative. Actually, we know Turkey has been hosting the world's largest number of refugees for decades now. And though there is a very progressive legal framework enabling the protection of the refugees, but also let them access to basic services and very importantly to the labor market. And beside numerous livelihood projects and funding, we are still facing huge challenges to provide at scales jobs in the formal sector. I would like to insist particularly on the formal part, because most of the refugees in Turkey work actually informally in the formal sector, but in an informal way, which also prevent them to work with decent working conditions. On top of that, there are growing tensions between communities over job competitions. Therefore, we brainstormed and we thought, what can we do? What can we do in terms of a new approach in order to stimulate actually the economic growth that will provide the opportunity, provide the space where we can create a large number of jobs for the Turkish population and the refugees, kind of win-win solutions. And we have approached this endeavor through the international preferential trade, based also on experiences done in other countries. We know all that the international preferential trade is also very much aligned and recommended by the Global Compact on Refugees, is also part of the international responsibility sharing. But from UNDP perspective, we didn't want just to have an economic lens as a response. Therefore, we are also recommending international labor law and environment and gender norms to be applied in this initiative. So it will also support Turkey to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. When you talk about adaptive solutions, I think we need also to adapt our solutions to the context. And Turkey is a G20 countries. So I think we need also to take this into considerations. There is a strong governance, strong institutions, large private sectors, export-oriented. We have a large also presence of organized industrial zones. And therefore, we decided to do a feasibility study with regular consultations with line ministries, Ministry of Trade, for instance, but also different trade units in various embassies. And actually, the result is through the partnership of public and private actors, we and based on the scenarios built up during in this feasibility study, we can see that we are suggesting based on thorough economic analysis that you can create hundreds of thousands of jobs for Turkish and refugees while boosting Turkish export by 3%. If we target specific sectors like textile, food industry, agriculture, which are very labor intensive. Here, our scenario was based on major market like the US, Canada, UK, and EU, but definitely there are also possible markets could be explored further. Here, the whole scenario is based also on the fact that Turkey and possible countries will enter into bilateral negotiations to about import quota, decrease taxes. But here we are not talking about a deal which will last forever. It's definitely to respond to exceptional circumstances with exceptional measures. So we are suggesting like a 10 years plan, for instance, which is, it's a kind of standard to enable the private sector to be comfortable and engage and also to have an impact. I will conclude here saying that though the Turkey Compact has been developed within a refugee response perspective, we definitely see also how these mechanisms, how these tools could be very important to support Turkey in the earthquake socio-economic recovery. It can definitely be here to complement humanitarian and development programming and funding effort. So it could be a very powerful way for the countries to support Turkey in hosting refugees and to recover from the earthquake impact. We put at the bottom of the slide a link, so we can, for those interested, we can reach the policy brief, but also the thorough feasibility study, so we can go understand better the methodology, how we reach this result. And I will be more than happy to respond to any comments or questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Philippe. I think these presentations and the next one as well, which is going to be specifically about Jordan, really help to understand how important context is and how adaptive solutions also need to adapt to their context. The last speaker that is going to talk about a specific country is Dr. Nabil Al-Fouyoumi. He's the managing director of the DigiSkills Association in Jordan, as I said. He serves as the technology advisor to Her Royal Highness Princess Sumaya bin Al Hassan, President of the Royal Scientific Society since 2017. And Dr. Al-Fouyoumy's career path equipped him with a unique mix of public, private, and academic experiences. He worked extensively in the private sector, managing technology companies, the Jordanian Public Service as a government chief information officer, and director general of the National Information Technology Center, and in academia, for example, at Yarmouk University. Nabil, can you tell us about how in Jordan you are leveraging the digital economy as a vehicle for inclusion of vulnerable host communities and refugees?
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and I'm happy to be here with you, everyone. Good evening. And I'm more of a technology expert, and however, now things have got integrated, whereby the crisis response requires innovative solutions, including digital solutions. And as for Jordan from the beginning, and as you know, no need to introduce the situation of Jordan, which is one of the most adversely impacted country by the Syrian crisis, especially that it has been receiving refugees since a long time ago, over 70 years. starting with the Palestinian crisis, then the Iraqi crisis, and then now the Syrian crisis. So the Jordan got used to being creative and innovative to find ways to explore inclusive ways. So even from the beginning of the crisis, Jordan has worked very hard on a response plan to make sure that we turn this into a rather non-destructive crisis for the Jordanian economy, which is a small economy that can be highly impacted. Jordan is the second worst country from a water perspective, and the number of refugees that fled to Jordan was substantially high. So from the beginning, there was plans for the government to make sure that the plans are inclusive of the refugees and to make sure that we reduce the suffering of these vulnerable groups. The most important thing in digital inclusiveness is access to digital channels, and that was planned by the government, knowing that Jordan has one of the highest internet penetration rates and has one of the best internet and digital infrastructures in the region. There were effective plans to assure access for internet to all refugees, and that there are numbers that I don't have with me today that show that there was an excellent outcome by providing access to internet to refugees, which introduces the topic I will be talking about. But let me start by introducing DigiSkills, which is a non-for-profit organization that was established almost 2 years ago by the Ministry of Digital Economy and Entrepreneurship to act as a private sector-led organization that aims at bridging the gap between the supply and demand sides in the ICT sector, because the skill gap is growing with the technology evolution. So the main task of this organization is to implement a program funded by a World Bank loan to the government of Jordan, through which we will seek to make sure that we bridge the gap between the supply side, including the educated and qualified refugees, and the demand side, which is the local market. I'll be talking about in more details shortly. And as part of this effort, we have partnered the Ministry of Digital Economy, DigiSkills, and UNDP have partnered to develop a highly effective and enabling tool for an inclusive digital skilling ecosystem. And I mean by that, it's rather a platform called DigiMahara that will provide access to employers, access to educational systems, access to beneficiaries, all stakeholders within the realm of supply demand in Jordan. Specifically in the ICT sector, but also ICT or digitally enabled sectors. As you know, ICT has penetrated all sectors and everything is becoming digital, but even more recently, everything is becoming dependent on AI, and that has its pros and cons, and this is not the place to address that. But we have developed this platform, which was started back in 2021, as I said, in partnership. And this is an interesting partnership because it brings governments, civil society, UNDP, a major donor in Jordan, and other stakeholders into the table, providing an effective tool that can help leverage technology to address a major challenge that we face. Not only in Jordan, but probably in the region and the globe, whereby the speed of technology evolution is moving much faster than the ability of educational learning systems to equip needed digital skills that are the way to access the job market. And I have to mention that even though we were talking about job creation and job market, but recently we are rethinking the terminology, because in Jordan, we are facing one of the major challenges is the high unemployability, which is exceeding 25% and increasing due to the economic instability, political instability across our region and maybe across the world. So that's why we have to think now we have to think in a different way. And now we're talking about more about sustainable income generation opportunities rather than jobs, because the traditional job market, even if you try your best to create in a country a small country like Jordan, might not be effective or might not address the need for accommodating large numbers of qualified and skilled resources. For that, the platform that I'm mentioning in this presentation will be further developed. Please, next slide, please, so that I can cover the points. This platform today addresses the basic features of a learning platform, providing access to vulnerable groups, including Syrian refugees, but needs to be further developed so that it can provide access to self-employment, access to the global gig economy that's growing and really opens the doors beyond the local limitations for Jordanians, the refugees, especially we're talking about women, youth, and Syrian refugees. We really need to develop this platform, which will be launched very soon, and it will require substantial effort to include data analytics within it, because it will hold valuable data as we start onboarding users onto it. So this is, to wrap up, this is a call for donors, interested people to help us further develop and enhance this system, which will be a major enabling tool for vulnerable groups within Jordan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Al-Fayumi, and apologies for cutting you off, for this valuable insight as well into concrete programming that can help. The next speaker is also going to give an NGO perspective. We have Dr. Yannick Dupont, who is the founder and CEO of Spark. Dr. Yannick has been working in the field of higher vocational education and economic development in post-conflict countries since 1994. The organization Spark programs include supporting growth-oriented small and medium-sized enterprises and facilitating youth job creation in fragile states, primarily in East and West Africa, the Middle East, and North Africa. Yannick Dupont also serves on several boards, including of the Max van der Stoel Foundation in The Hague, the advisory board of the Center of Theory of Change in New York, and he's a member of the DIHAD, International Scientific Advisory Board at DIHAD in Dubai. Dr. Yannick, could you tell us more about how Spark's work, and specifically the STEP program, advances refugees and host communities' self-reliance? And in light of how durable solutions are out of reach for the vast majority of refugees, can you outline in what ways your work is supporting adaptive solutions?
Yes, thank you very much. And it's so nice to be in this group. We've worked very closely with UNDP in places like Burundi, Kosovo, around the Syria theater. And of course, with the Islamic Development Bank, we work since 2018 on various programs, including STEP, that we'll come to in a moment. And since last year, we joined hands with the Abdulaziz Al Ghudair Foundation on STEP, in fact. Yeah, I'm very happy and very proud to see such a broad group of actors, as has been iterated before on this panel, because I think really truly with the reduction of resources that will only worsen, in my view, unfortunately, primarily because of other geopolitical priorities, notably the Russian-Ukraine war. Yeah, we need to get more innovative. We need to collaborate closer. We need to get more efficient and more effective. to at least offset some of the impact that the refugees and the host communities are going to feel and are already feeling. So I think it's our moral obligation, but I also see it as an exciting challenge to try to do exactly that. First, maybe brief on Spark. So Spark works in 15 fragile states, now 29 years old organization, Dutch nonprofit by origin, and indeed focusing on job creation for youth, primarily women and refugees, IDPs, and host communities, and spillover countries. So it's also in places like Turkey, but primarily directly in conflict areas like Libya, Somalia, Afghanistan, Ukraine. So when I thought about this topic, and I will use STEP as the stepping stone, I think, to my intervention. For us, it is super essential to take localization to the ultimate conclusion. And I say that because of two reasons. One, because we have been discussing it for decades, I think, in international development. But if you look at the statistics of how much aid is localized, it's actually quite embarrassingly low, in my view. But secondly, I think if we do so wisely, for example, and then I'll reference another program, the Tadamon program that UNDP is leading with ISDB, and we identify the proper local partners. We truly give them leadership of creation of programs, so they are in the lead of creating programs, not just seen as implementing partners. Then I think we can move to more sustainability, more relevance of actions, but also ensure that that the impact, efficiency, effectiveness of our interventions is increasing. So on STEP, for example, just to mention a couple of examples that also go into the innovation area. For example, in Turkey, we were able to partner on another program with ICB, in fact, with Hepsi Burada, which is the Turkish Amazon.com, the large internet platform to onboard women entrepreneurs with their products, leading to 10% increase of their revenue. Turkonfed, the SME Association, ran designed and ran programs. Groups like Jasur, who also had a side meeting yesterday in Brussels, that is basically being established by diaspora of Syrian businessmen and women, and knows as no other how to reach young enterprising Syrians. I think their intake and programs is 10-20-fold what we tried ourselves before, or what we saw other organizations doing. So they had 20 times, I think, higher intake rates, but also amazing coaches from the network, Syrian business people abroad. They do it with a passion and with professionalism. So when I think about the topic and how to get more results, I think we need to, what are our experiences with good local partners, and how do we get them into the programming, and how do we get them into co-creating programs, lead these programs, and then leveraging their local intelligence, expertise, and networks. Now, that would then bring me to the role that we would like to take in the coming period, also with STEP program. I think it's more now one to leverage and broker coalitions. So I think also for Spark, we're trying to move more to the passenger seat, put local partners more and more in driving seat mode, and then try to connect. So on STEP, for example, we were able to mobilize 6 or 7 other donors, partners, programs from the EU, the Dutch, other JCC states, and just try to get more impact by uniting forces, and not only financial, but actually also getting access to their networks, to their experts, to their ongoing programs. There's a lot to be attained there. Another principle, and I think that has been referenced, I heard it also being referenced before on STEP, is that we start actually from the private sector. So when we train youth towards jobs, we start with the jobs. So we start looking at, okay, there are obstacles in certain of the legislations for work for refugees, but in which sectors can they work? So program your training in these sectors, but then take it a step further. Talk first to the employers, like Turkonfed in Turkey. They have 50,000 SMEs as a member. So they told us, these are the sectors, these are the vacancies, that we have difficulty to fill, and then you work your training program towards that, basically, so that we train towards employment. innovation and approach. I'm also very happy now that we are able to link in also with STEP through another program that we're running with Google and Udacity. I think Udacity, where also the Abdulaziz Al Ghurair Foundation is doing a lot of good work with, which really Google and Udacity are have leading platforms on online education, online micro-credentialing and certification that are really respected by the business community more than maybe traditional diplomas. And not stop there, but then try to look in the supplier networks of the firms to find actual jobs for the best graduates from these micro-credentialing. So particularly, I would particularly indeed also look at that also in the view of the presentation just before me. Also because it takes out barriers to local legislation. You do not put a lot of pressure or no pressure at all actually on local labor market if refugees can work online. And it is a heavy growth market. Yeah, and then of course, I mean, yeah, impact. I think with the STEP program, yeah, heavy focus on the outcomes, of course, numbers of jobs created. We start to track now for a number of years the cost per job created between different interventions. I think that can sometimes be confronting because sometimes things that you think are actually going quite well when you look at the metrics, it may not be the cost efficiency we're looking for. So we also have to make, I think, sometimes very difficult choices on what we scale and what we say goodbye to. Also in the light, just to drop another thing, maybe for discussion later, but sometimes it also means we need to do things or we need to stop doing things at Spark. So in Turkey, give again an example, there was a recent huge tender on last year on scholarship programs that we ran for years, the implementing partner for years. We took a conscious decision not to apply and to work to help our local partners to apply. And we stepped back. Very painful also for teams. But I think we need to do this, the innovation, digitalization, calculate cost per job, especially in this day and age when, again, resources are dwindling. And I think we have a very high responsibility to our beneficiaries. Yeah, so I think through that and through STEP and other programs so far, yeah, I was very proud. I think when I asked the team to tell me, so what exactly did we produce? So we had indeed 14,500 Syrian youth and host community youth completing scholarships. Now more and more also through STEP program. So it's still running, it's increasing. A lot of local colleges and local groups that are waiving tuition, that are offering free accommodation, that are throwing in lunches. So we approach it as a partnership with local institutions. Yeah, I think I will basically stop there and just maybe just to wrap. I think that for us, the approaches and to reach sustainability and going to the next phase is very, and particularly with STEP, is very much to try to mobilize as many partners towards STEP as possible, to keep it very open, to really make sure that we design all the interventions local, with all the difficulties, of course, that go with that. And particularly look at innovative job solutions, digital, online, with corporate partners that have that expertise in partnerships, and can also offer credentialing, but more importantly, access to their supplier networks for jobs. So that's it. I'll leave it here, and yeah, very much looking forward to the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Yannick. And thank you also for pointing out, like, whenever we discuss these kind of like big, broad frameworks that we are discussing today, how important it is to choose the right starting point, and also to recognize, I think, as whatever individual actor you are, your own strengths and weaknesses in that. I think that's really offered an interesting perspective on the types of programming that we're discussing today. The last person I would like to introduce on this panel is Nesma Farahat, who is the head of programs at the Abdullah Al Ghurair Foundation for Education. She managed the design, development, launch, and expansion of the 75,000 plus member Youth Thinkers Program and NOMU, a national youth upskilling initiative. Previously, she was the managing director of the Commercial International Bank Foundation, which is a multi-million-dollar corporate social responsibility initiative of the leading commercial bank in Egypt. Nesma has extensive experience in sustainable community development across a wide range of geographies and holds a Master of Science from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. Nesma, the Abdullah Al Khourer Foundation manages the Abdulaziz Al Khourer Refugee Education Fund, and the fund awards grants based on a competitive selection process to organizations working directly with refugee vulnerable youth in the United Arab Emirates, Lebanon, and Jordan. Can you expand to us from an Arab and regional donor perspective, and as a foundation, the key lessons learned on financing models that support adaptive solutions in practice, and some of the positive outcomes that you've been able to document as a result?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to represent an Arab organization here as well. So the Abdulaziz Al Khourer Refugee Education Fund was established in 2018 in response to the ongoing crisis in the region and the increasing challenges facing youth in conflict-affected countries. The fund is not an implementing agency, so our partners are our implementing arms of the funds and institutions without which we would not be able to operate. And so what are the ways that we're able to provide sustainable, dignified livelihoods for the forcibly displaced and vulnerable members of host communities in crisis-affected countries? So we work with our partners on the ground to ensure that refugees are not taking the jobs of the local communities, but rather we're providing them with a journey to a better livelihood that's complementary. We believe in social inclusion and working with host communities, and know that there's no immediate solution. As the other speakers have said, this is 13 years into a crisis with no end in sight, and we need to look at providing opportunities and adaptive solutions that are looked at from a long-term sustainable lens. And we know that no one organization can do it alone. So at the fund, we take a strategic collaborative approach to authentic partnerships that helps us to ensure that we keep our focus on the needs of the forcibly displaced and most vulnerable. We have over 20 grantees and partner organizations that work directly with refugees and host communities. And through those partnerships, we've been able to provide opportunities to over 61,000 children and youth in Jordan, Lebanon, and the UAE. The fund adopts an outcomes-focused philanthropic approach and values a partnership model. This allows us to ensure that all of our projects are impact-driven and further focuses the importance on data collection, data analysis, and evaluation to explore innovative solutions. We also adopted this model to release some of the burden on the government, on other donor entities. We know that 80% of the forcibly displaced are living in host communities in Jordan, for example. You know, I was just in Jordan in January, and I met children who were born in the camps. So, you know, they've never even been to their host community. So finding adaptive solutions for integration, for inclusion, for equal opportunities is extremely important. So over the years, we've had 4 key learnings on how, as a donor, we can best support adaptive solutions on the ground. The first is responsiveness and resilience. And so this is a lot about helping the forcibly displaced and host communities in meeting their emerging needs. And this can either take the form of repurposing funds, speeding up decision-making, ensuring interventions are relevant to the labor market, and just addressing these emerging challenges. One example I can give of this is in Lebanon, with the economic situation, the explosion, COVID, we were working with an organization that was providing remedial education support at community centers across the country. These centers were working with the problems of overcrowded classrooms, the double shifts, not enough teachers. When learning went online learning was only provided to 9th and 12th grade students. So you had multiple years of students who were out of school. Prior to COVID in 2019, there were riots. So you had students who were out of school for 3 months as well. So what the Refugee Education Fund did was identify another donor organization to provide devices for those students who were unable to access the online, or who were not given the opportunity for the online education. When you provide the devices and there's no electricity, you also have to provide internet. So we also did that and provided power banks for both teachers and students. With the onset of COVID, we also partnered with Discovery Education to create a program for online learning, again, so that we were able to ensure that everybody who was eligible to access education and who should access education could. So really it was about, or really one of the things that we've learned is you can have, the best laid plans, and as soon as something happens, those don't matter anymore. And really it's about being responsive to the needs on the ground. Our second learning has been about being flexible. And so, as I mentioned, we're always striving for innovative and creative solutions, and you can't really stick to the rigidity of your plans because they may no longer be relevant. For example, in 2019, we worked with an organization in Jordan called Luminous Technical University College, and the Abdulaziz Al Khoury Refugee Education Fund essentially allocated funding for 2,800 scholarships at the university college. As Luminous started engaging with the private sector and realizing that there were emerging needs in the labor market that were not covered by the curriculum at Luminous, they came to us and said, can we actually provide 2,500 scholarships as opposed to 2,800 and redirect those funding, that funding for the 300 students towards creating new programming in programming and coding, I believe it was. We said, okay, if you have confirmed that there are jobs in these spaces, yes, let's redirect those funds to that area. So Luminous went back, redesigned their curriculum. We've now created the Abdulaziz Al Khoury School for Advanced Computing that was born out of that redirecting and flexibility of redirecting those funds. The school has almost 5,000 students registered now and has had 80% successful employment rates of its graduates. So again, having that flexibility from our original plans to responding to these needs and being adaptive. The third learning has been the power of strong partnerships, and I think that that's been demonstrated kind of by every speaker today, some of those who we already work with and some who we're hoping to work with. We want to build our partnerships to merge expertise and efficiency and build on what exists to avoid duplication. Through our partnerships, we've been able to expand from an initial target in 2018 of 20,000 youth to over 61,000 youth without adding additional funds to the funds. And it's because we partner with like-minded donors and realize that strategic philanthropy is not just a transaction. It is a deeper level of engagement. Our chairman is a big proponent of talking about how it is easy to give money and write a check, but it is not easy to give your time and your knowledge and your network and your business acumen. And when we work with other organizations or other strategic philanthropists who adopt the same approach, you are just able to create these partnerships that are built on trust and transparency and clear dialogue. And really giving credibility to communication channels to be able to work for success. The last thing I want to share is that it's okay to have realistic expectations without compromising on quality. I think as Philippe may have alluded to, not everyone can and should respond to an emergency. There are long-term sustainable solutions that can be pursued. One example is after the explosion in Beirut, we worked in an area called Karantina that was very close to the explosion. And one thing that we noticed was a need was window installation services. So we worked with young members of the community and trained them on how to install windows. And this is a long-term need. It's not an emergency response. We purposely stayed away from emergency response, but gave these community members the opportunity to develop a trade that will give them a long-term solution and an adaptive solution to what they need. We are very focused on not just making promises, but about delivering on our commitments. I think that's very noticeable by our chairman, His Excellency Abdelaziz Al Ghurair, and the way that we approach the partnerships and the people that we choose to work with. And really being relentless in making sure that we find innovative solutions and build strategic partnerships and collectively work to make a lasting difference is really the only way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all the speakers for the rich interventions and for mentioning so many different types of opportunities to advance and support adaptive solutions. I think it's really important to see all these different angles that are being taken to support self-reliance and also to deal with the tension that sometimes exists between vulnerability and the type of development work that is possible and the competitiveness that sometimes is built into programming for the communities that we work for. Before we move to the Q&A, I would like to invite Catherine Osborne, who is the policy advisor on forced displacement within UNDP's Crisis Bureau, to briefly come in with some reflections from the global level, which basically is the only perspective I think that we haven't had this afternoon. And then I promise we will get to your questions as well. Kate?
Great, thank you so much, Amy. Just checking that you can hear me well. Lovely, and I'll try to be very brief because I'm really interested to hear the questions and answers as well. So just to say, first of all, thank you to UNDP colleagues and the Islamic Development Bank for organizing this excellent event that has created this space to discuss, review and share experiences on improving development pathways to address the challenges of forced displacement. And it's also so great to see so many familiar faces online and in the room today. As highlighted, any real resolution to refugee and internal displacement situations requires development as well as humanitarian interventions. And as our UNDP administrator has said just recently, emerging from crisis depends on development. Development is the only way to prevent crisis and remain resilient when crisis strikes. UNDP as the largest development actor in the UN system has a critical role, and through our new crisis offer and its framework for development solutions to crisis and fragility, UNDP globally is stepping up our work to help countries anticipate, prevent, respond and recover from crises. The nature of all too often protracted displacement has been highlighted by many panelists today, and its impact on hosting communities and countries requires the long-term integrated gender-responsive development solutions that help countries to break the cycle of fragility, get ahead of the crisis curve and sustain development to invest in hope from jobs to justice. And UNDP, through its framework of the implementation of resilience-based development and adaptive solutions in the region, as described by Abdullah earlier, outlines a theory of change for what is required and UNDP's role to work with governments and all partners to support solutions to forced displacement. The adaptive solutions approach builds upon UNDP's global work and our mandate to support national systems and actors, including government, civil society, and the private sector, to find pathways towards solutions. This regional approach is fully in line with our engagement in such global policy processes as the Global Refugee Forum around our 2019 pledges and the broader pledge we plan to make at this year's forum, as well as UNDP's new institutional plan, which is in response to the call of the UN Secretary General in his action agenda on internal displacement for earlier and more predictable engagement of development partners. And finally, to close, as we move towards this year's Global Refugee Forum and working towards what we understand will be a high-level event on the implementation of the action agenda on internal displacement in 2024, we need to learn from regional responses like the one we're discussing today in relation to this Syria crisis. And finally, as Amy mentioned, we must be able to have more dialogues like the one today to support that more joined up approach across partners. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kate. And thank you, everybody. I hope in advance for your flexibility, as we think we're going to run over about 10 minutes. But we want to make sure at least to have at least 15 for questions and answers. Please Anybody in the room, anybody online? Feel free now to raise your hands if you would like to ask one of the panelists a question. Alia.
Yes, I think if you can say, sorry, if you can say your question, then we can repeat it. Yes. Or if you want to, please feel free to.
No worries. So thank you very much. My name is Alia Farhat. I'm coming from Lebanon, working with a local NGO, but also representing the Forum of Local NGOs. And one of the words that was mentioned by Yannick is music to our ear. Localization is at the heart of the sustainable adaptive solutions. And this includes, of course, co-creation of programs with local NGOs, keeping in mind the nexus approach, but also highlighting key principles of localization, such as access to predictable, multi-year, flexible funding that allows us to test, do some pilots, but also to try to have some new innovative programming. Just a couple of things. So for us, we consider that adaptive solutions will depend on the context, and it's something that you've been mentioning, and it may take different shapes. It could be that entrepreneurship and income generation activity is the way forward in some contexts, but not be in others. Also, what is important is that for us, adaptive solutions depend on the phase of displacement of the refugees, because it's very different depending on which phase they are. And for example, access to finance could be an important aspect to look into for the refugees who've been already in the host country for many years. But here comes also the way where we need to be innovative. So for example, if we're talking about access to finance, what we recommend is to have a blended finance approach where in a transitory phase, it's, you know, like a grant, a loan plus a grant, or a subsidized interest loan. But the idea is also for us to try to move out of the pure 100% grant approach for the refugees who've been already in the country for time. Last point. Again, it's very important to have this collaborative approach, to continue having this dialogue, to think together about what kind of innovative solutions, adaptive solutions we can have. And this embeds UN agencies, international NGOs, local NGOs, and donors, and also in collaborating with forum of NGOs in the different countries. Thank you.
Shukran, thank you, Alia. I didn't hear a question. These are reflections which are very welcome as well. But position of the UNDP regarding localization and how much it's going to be on the agenda also within our region in the coming year.
There's another question. Maybe we can take that too. And
great. Yes. So I will repeat the question that was just asked in the room, and then open the mic for the person who is online who has a question. But Alia's question in the room is, what is basically UNDP's localization agenda for the coming period, short term as well? And that also definitely includes what types of partners and the perspective they have on this. And online, Rula, can you open your mic? If not, I'm happy to read out a typed question as well, but it might take you more time.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, it took me a second to unmute. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. I would just like to add just a small point on the Digi Maharat platform that was presented by Dr. Nabil. I'd just like to add that one of the objectives of the platform was to support the integration of both refugees and migrants into the regional and global labor market by providing them with the necessary skills and certifications that would allow them to be more competitive. Because, for example, in the Jordanian labor market, not all sectors, especially professions, sorry, not sectors, professions within the ICT and IT sector are open for refugees and migrants. Therefore, by upskilling them and providing them with certification, they are able to work through freelance, the gig economy, beyond that, transcend just the Jordanian labor market. So that's just a small comment. On my question, I have a question to, I didn't get the name, but it's basically on the tension monitoring system, if I may. I have, so a question on how the data is being collected. Is it collected through the field or feedback from community organizations, or is it collected through, for example, social media platforms? And is this AI driven? Just to get an idea of how this data is being consolidated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe both of these questions actually go to our speaker from UNDP Lebanon, Elina.
Great, I'll try to answer those. I'll wait with Alia's trickier question and maybe start with attention monitoring. So the attention monitoring is an adaptive tool. So we also adapt the ways we collect data. So currently we're working with 7 different sources of data. One is a representative perception survey, which we run across populations, so both refugees and host communities on a quarterly basis. And this data is representative at the district level. And of course, as I mentioned before, it's reshared with partners. We do also do automated social media monitoring, and this is driven by artificial intelligence. We've been focusing mainly on Facebook and Twitter so far, but we're now expanding also to some of the new tools, I guess, for us millennials, so looking sort of at TikTok and Instagram. We've just done a report on how WhatsApp is being used in Lebanon to drive tensions. And we also do incident monitoring, where we use partially official data that the security forces are producing, but also UN data and open source data in terms of incidents. So we're trying also here to kind of have an adaptive approach of what data is available and how can that be used. I think when it comes to the localization question, this is something actually, Alia, that we're addressing in the Adaptive Solutions report, and which I think is one of the key recommendations. And of course, I think this is one of the challenges we're having now in this compounded crisis, because of course, we do want, to the extent possible, work with local institutions and not replace, for example, municipalities. But I think we're recognizing more and more the role that NGOs, and specifically local NGOs, are playing. So the MSLD tool that I presented, I think, is a really good example how we can do this together. It's a UNDP tool, but the actual exercise is run by a local NGO from that area. So a local NGO that's well placed in terms of understanding the conflict sensitivities and doing the analysis, and then being a part of really planning with the municipality on how we can do these local development plans. And I think that in the current context in Lebanon, this is more how we need to work. I think another area where we really see the role of local NGOs is conflict sensitivity mainstreaming. So we're building now a network of conflict sensitivity mainstreaming trainers, which we're doing in Arabic, where we're hoping to really utilize the local partners that we have here in Lebanon to be sort of, you know, the kind of front runners and the frontliners here, and helping us really work with partners across, also with local government, to really kind of build that base. So I'm hoping, Alia, that that's something we can do together in the future as well.
Thank you very much. I see Philippe has also raised his hand. Philippe, can I ask you as well to answer a question that a participant posed us before the event started? Also, you're welcome, of course, to answer the previous two. But maybe if you have a minute to also say something about how you see adaptive solutions applied early in other crises, for example, when it comes to Sudanese refugees in Egypt. That's the question. How do you see adaptive solutions applied in early in other crises?
Yeah, thank you very much, Lana. I will try to respond to the second question, but just maybe on localizations, because it's also something very close to my work and my heart, and maybe an inspiration for others as a best practice. In Turkey, we recently established the National Reference Group, has been called by the Grand Bargain 2.0, and now the Secretariat is established with a Refugee Council of Turkey, localized as a group, but also UN donors, NGOs, entities supported by the NIR network. So I think it is very interesting to establish a platform where we can definitely have, particularly in Turkey, where we didn't have so much a strong coordinated body already for the local national organization. So I'm pleased to say that it has taken place, work in progress. And also, I will just add that, unfortunately, but we are also learning from crises and seize opportunities. Because of the earthquake, the UN country team, which has been pretty much a close club, let's say, has opened up very much now to NGO presence. And it has been very much acknowledged. And so now we have NGO representative as part of UNCT. And also as part of the sector responding to the earthquake, NGOs have been co-leading the sectors, particularly like the one I'm coordinating on early recovery. So I think it's definitely best practices. There is still a lot of work in progress, but I think it's interesting examples. And if you want to hear more, we're happy to liaise with you. Now, regarding your question, Lana, well, I think it's always complicated to provide his wisdom or practices to different contexts, because every context matters. There is no simple recipe. Maybe a few trends or lesson learned. Maybe I can humbly share here from my 3 years in Turkey. First of all, I think it's super important to work at policy, at program level. They should complement each other. They should evidence-based. They should complement each other. My experience shows that if you neglect the policy part and try endlessly to achieve result in an unconducive policy environment, it's a lot of waste of resources and effort. So I think policy is very complicated to change, particularly at national level, but I think it should be an ongoing effort at UN, at NGOs, donors, and collective effort. I think also one let's say trends I've seen in Turkey but elsewhere is that we never also acknowledge that a refugee situation is going to be protracted. We always look at it as a short, maybe situations, and therefore we neglect investing from the start from a more development perspective. Humanitarian should be there definitely for the most vulnerables, but we need also to transform and adapt based on the context to a more long-term perspective. Changing the narrative, I think this is what is key. You know, most of the time refugees are seen as burden. So if we can definitely change the narrative, bringing different lands, that is not a burden, but opportunities. But for that, we definitely need also to build the resilience of individuals, communities, and systems like municipalities and so on, so they can absorb the newcomers. And I will say two last things. I think it's also very important for us, more from the development perspective, to invest in data. Because if you don't have right data, I'm not talking only the quantitative, because usually you have a disaggregated data per sex and nationality, but we don't have the qualitative ones, the profiling. How we can go to, for instance, if you think about socio-economy, livelihood, how we can engage if we don't have the right profiling of the refugees, what are their skills, because everybody is bringing his own experience in these skills, but this is something we usually neglect. And with great respect for my humanitarian colleagues, this is sometimes not something they look at. So I think it's important for us to remind them. And I would say also in terms of partnership, very important to start engaging the private sector from day one as well, because not repeating the mistakes of having so many vocational training, totally not matching the market needs. So I think strategic operational engagement with private sector is key. Civil society, we just mentioned it, but also I think particularly if you think about Egypt or Sudan refugees, for instance, engaging opinion religious leaders, because they are also able seemingly to provide also positive narratives. I will just conclude one thing, and maybe not related to your point, Lana, but just maybe to have an argument, discussions. Definitely focusing on digital tools, e-commerce, digital work platform, online learning, all that is so fundamental. But I think we should not also neglect the fact there is a big digital gap. There is also a lot of unskilled workers. And there are also sectors like agriculture, industry that needs also real manpower. So not everything can be solved via digital tools. It should be very important tools to complement. But here in Turkey, you have millions of workers, and just providing digital tools will not solve the solutions. It will be one solution, but not the ultimate solutions. So I think we should pay attention to that, not to invest only on digital, because we need also to invest also on the, let's say, the blue collar, let's say, if I may express myself. So I hope I provided few points here. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippe. The last question we have is for Nesma, which is in broad strokes, basically, whether you can elaborate a little bit more on the obstacles and challenges that programs like the ones that you outlined face. And I think one interesting question there is when it comes to the targets, like basically the populations that participate. Thank you.
Yeah. Where does one start with the challenges? It's interesting. I think every day brings a different challenge. I think we're blessed in our region to have a number of challenges that arise quite often. I think where we find the best approach to addressing these challenges is with that open dialogue that we have with our partners. So when we have issues like internet penetration, devices, we had one project where the girls 50% of the girls dropped out of the project because it was socially unacceptable for them to be on the internet. So they couldn't engage in our online programming. These are challenges that are going to happen every day. We're going to face them. And I think it just comes back to the theme of this as adaptive solutions. There's no one size fits all model. No digital tool is going to solve that. And I think we are in a very good position as a foundation, as a fund, to take risks. And so challenges can be fun and opportunistic, to be able to identify where we make those interventions. You're going to have challenges, whether they're global pandemics, whether they're economic related, and really it's just about having that relationship with our grantees who know that they can come to us with these challenges without fear of losing their funding as well, and being able to be open and communicative about challenges that are on the ground. And we're in a very fortunate position to have our leadership and our chairman, His Excellency Abdelaziz Al-Ghourer, who understands this and is willing to work to find these adaptive solutions. I mean, there's a long list of challenges, but I think really the focus is on how we leverage the partnerships to respond to those, as opposed to kind of discussing each one. Yeah.
Thank you. That was a tough question to answer in a very short amount of time. Thank you very much. I will hand over the floor back to Ms. Sarah Poole for some closing remarks. From my side, I just wanted to say thank you to all the speakers for all of your insights. It was really interesting and insightful in terms of topics, very broad as well. Sarah?
Thanks so much, Amy. And yes, let me start by echoing you. I think really this has been an excellent session. And I would like to thank definitely the panelists, but also very much the audience for their participation, but also for the comments and the reflections that they've made. We said at the outset that part of the value of having this kind of side event on such an important but also complex issue is the value of learning, of having different experiences that we can relate to, but also to see how we can take from those elements of the adaptive solutions, certainly from this sub-region, but also from other examples globally. So it's, from our perspective as a co-organizer, it's very much achieved that and more. As always, it's very difficult to be able to provide concluding remarks and summarizing such a robust discussion, especially knowing that we're a bit over time. So rather than doing a comprehensive overview, let me just highlight a couple of key takeaways that we can use for reflections as to how we take this work forward together after today's session has ended. And I think quite a powerful theme that has come across the messaging, the questions, the different country examples is really that of interconnections towards adaptive solutions at the local level through partnerships. And some of the key words that we heard, certainly the partnerships. I think it resonates across. It's clear, as was said at the beginning, this is a very complex challenge for the people, for the host communities, for the countries. And it's not a challenge that could be met by one organization or by one kind of organization alone. So the interface between the partnerships across the spectrum is critical. The second interconnection is between the humanitarian assistance and the development approaches. And again, this has been quite critically reinforced, I think, again, through the messages, but also the examples of how that interface between the humanitarian approaches and the development need to bridge that immediacy of the response, but also that medium and longer term perspective. The next theme, very, very strongly, local solutions, co-creations, and partnerships that enable those local solutions, that co-creation to address the challenges, but also to reinforce the opportunities. Another key message coming out is the appropriate financing modalities that need to be in place to make these programs a reality, including the flexibility, but also the multi-year funding. The next is looking at that tools that we have, whether in the sub-region or where we can learn from others, whether it's the context sensitivity, again, those local solutions, co-creation, innovations and digital approaches, but also, as we heard in the example of training, looking at these as tools, but what else do we need? For example, training for employment, agricultural production, whatever the needs on the ground are. And then finally, that connection between the programming and policy, data and evidence. We can discuss the key themes that have come from this discussion, I think, for quite some time, but recognizing that there's a number of other important side events to go to. I just really wanted to share our appreciation again to the ISDB for being such an important partner in this region, for such an important partner on this issue that we're addressing today on adaptive solutions, and really to convey UNDP's commitment to continuing not just this dialogue, but working together with all of the partners on the kind of approaches that will really bring the fruits of adaptive solutions for the refugees and for the host communities across this region. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you also to the participants here in person and online. And for those participating in the conference, I hope it's productive. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.